Here on this first Sunday of the Lenten season, which began with Ash Wednesday this past Wednesday, March 1st, our reading from the Gospel of Matthew concerns the testing or trial or temptation of Jesus in the wilderness. Next, Jesus was taken into the wild by the Holy Spirit for the test. The tempter was ready to give it. Jesus prepared for the test by fasting 40 days and 40 nights. That left him, of course, in a state of extreme hunger, which Satan took advantage of in the first test. Since you are God's Son, speak the word that will turn these stones into loaves of bread. Jesus answered by quoting from Deuteronomy. It takes more than bread to stay alive. It takes a steady stream of words from God's mouth. For the second test, Satan took him to the holy city. He set him on top of the temple and said, "Since you are God's Son, jump." The tempter goaded him by quoting Psalm 91. He has placed you in the care of angels. They will catch you so that you won't so much as stub your toe on a stone. Jesus countered with another citation from Deuteronomy. Don't you dare test the Lord your God. For the third test, Satan took him to the peak of a huge mountain. He gestured expansively, pointing out all of the earth's kingdoms, how glorious they all were. Then he said, "They're yours, lock, stock, and barrel. Just go down on your knees and worship me, and all this will be yours." Jesus' refusal was curt. "Beat it, Satan." He backed his rebuke with a third quotation from Deuteronomy. Worship the Lord your God, and only Him. Serve Him with absolute single-heartedness. The test was over. The tempter left, and in his place angels came and took care of Jesus' needs. Well, it's a very interesting time, not only the beginning of the Lenten journey, that we should hear from the Gospels this testing, this trial in the wilderness of Jesus, but we are just following the last 4 weeks that we have been looking at the book of Job. And you might have noticed, reading between the lines, a little difference here. The Gospels, of course, coming many centuries after the book of Job was written down, and then the story of Job preceded its being written by many more centuries, going way, way back. Some say to the patriarchal period, the time of Abraham, which would have been almost 4,000 years ago, twice as far back in history as the Gospels and the life of Jesus Christ. Well, in the book of Job, we noted the understanding at that time was that Satan came and convinced God to try Job with all of the tests he went through, losing his health, his wealth, his family. And now in the gospel, here is described Satan on his own initiating these trials, the so-called tempter. And it relates in an interesting way to something that we just spoke in our prayer, the Lord's Prayer. Whether we speak it with the unity version of lead us not into temptation, or the more traditional translations, leave us not in trial, or abandon us not, for you deliver us from evil. We have a turning point, one of many, that Jesus brought to the people. For in ancient times, it was expected for the hero, the spiritual leader, to be tested with hard trials. We can think of the many Grecian myths of wandering and trials, and other cultures as well. But when Jesus prepared this Lord's Prayer, this perfect pattern that he taught his disciples, we have a turn where now our God was no longer one who put human beings to the test, but instead God was the power and love that brought us through the trials of our own making. So whenever we speak the Lord's Prayer and use the word temptation, or in other versions trial, we can think that this was a tremendous shift in the consciousness of humanity during the ministry of Jesus Christ on this earth. A new realization. In another point, he quoted saying that God tests no one. God is the overcoming power that leads us through the challenges and tests that we meet in this life, but not from God's hand. Here, this first Sunday of Lent, I chose that song, The Long and Winding Road. Oh, it goes back to my youth. My brothers listened to the Beatles, not so much I. I was not quite into grown-up music at that time. But that song, of course, has many interpretations. I remember years ago when I attended the Unity Church in Houston, Texas in the late 70s, and our ministers, Reverend Sig and Janie Paulson, often the church would bring in very well-known and accomplished popular singers in Houston and have them sing for the service. And sometimes we were shocked a little bit with the so-called worldly songs or popular songs, and the Paulsons liked us to be grown up enough to be able to hear a worthy message in the song. So here, this morning, as we sang along with that very popular Beatles tune, it speaks of us, of a long and winding path, a long and winding road, if we choose to walk the path of self-development, of spiritual growth. It is a process. It does take time. Now, it's interesting to note that one Christian tradition, the season of Lent, practiced in different ways by different denominations of Christianity, that this is one tradition that Unity prepared a guide for. A book published with the title Keep a True Lent. Prepared in 1953, that was after Charles Fillmore's passing. And the book is credited to him, of course, but it was really his second wife, Cora, who actually put together the collection of Charles' inspirational writings on Christian themes that are appropriate for Lent and for the Holy Week of Easter. And so they prepared this book not only with a dozen introductory essays about basic concepts in Christianity and Unity's understanding, but then 40 readings for the days of Lent. Not to confuse, there are 40 days, not counting the Sundays, but we won't go into all of the detail. But these daily devotionals that you can work through on your path to Easter. In her introduction to Keep a True Lent, Georgiana Tree West, the famous Unity minister of New York City in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, described the Christian tradition and how the Unity student might observe Lent. She wrote, "The Christian world is once again observing the Lenten season, the season of prayer and fasting that precedes the joyous festivity of Easter. It's commonly believed that the Lenten period has to do with the events of the 40 days preceding the resurrection of Jesus Christ. This is an erroneous idea. Lent is a church institution and there is no authority for it anywhere in the New Testament. The idea, however, has a sound spiritual basis. Moses, Elijah, and Jesus himself set a precedent for it. Each observed a 40-day period of prayer and fasting as a preparation for spiritual work. Moses received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai at the conclusion of his fast. Elijah talked with God on Mount Horeb at the conclusion of his period of prayer and fasting. Jesus began his great spiritual ministry at the close of his fast in the wilderness that we just read from Matthew's Gospel. One of the most valuable ways of observing the Lenten season is to fast from, that is, to loose and let go, the belief that men or nations can stand in the way of God's good will for humanity. Now is the time to affirm the power of the Christ Spirit indwelling in all human beings everywhere and influencing their thoughts, words, and actions to work for the good of the whole. We all want to be of some influence in establishing world peace. To do so, we must learn to obey Paul's exhortation. Let us therefore follow after the things which make for peace. Each one of us must be concerned with improving his or her own life. We must learn to deny our selfish impulse and be obedient to the impulses of love, compassion. We must withdraw our attention, interest, and support from the false and the unworthy. This is true fasting. When we give that same attention, interest, and support to the enduring good, we are feasting on the things of spirit, which is true prayer. When we have truly fasted in the Christ way, we have increased our ability to respond to God's good will. The Lenten season prepared us to understand and experience the resurrecting power that is the focus of the Easter mystery. Unlike our modern times that sees resurrection exemplified by spring renewal in the emerging plants and the budding trees, we see it all around the lake already, this very early first week of March. The trees in my apartment complex are filled with blooms. The forsythia bushes are brilliant yellow, and it seems so early. But nature is waking up. And this was associated in our more modern times with the resurrection of life. But at an even more ancient humanity understood the resurrection differently. They associated it with the autumn, just the opposite, the autumn time of year, when nature seems to die away in the withering plants. What did that mean to them? Well, we can get a hint from Unity's Charles Fillmore, who pointed out that as something in the physical world decays or disappears, it reappears in the spiritual world, or what he called the realm of ideas. Pure potential, pure possibility. We can take a rose, for example, as it fades, withers, and is gone, but not really. It is simply returned to the realm of ideas where spirit holds all true and ideal forms of the rose. So what happens when some circumstance in our life changes, ends, seems to die? The truth of it, the power that brought it into expression, returns to spirit, to potential, to possibility. Our circumstances can change. Our dreams, desires, goals, visions return to pure potentiality as they fade from this physical world. We know this because nothing is ever lost in God's creation. It changes form. So for the ancients, resurrection or rebirth was a divine idea that they saw expressed in the fading during autumn. In our time, we see rebirth in a more materialistic way, as expressed in the rebirth of nature in springtime. In either traditional understanding, the purpose is to witness the fluctuation of the eternal between physical expression and invisible divine idea. Now, for our personal practice during Lent, how can we further develop our ability to see both realities? The religious custom of Ash Wednesday that we celebrated this past Wednesday with its ceremony of ashes is an attempt to admit our limited viewpoint, that we don't yet see it all. Some Christian churches see the ash as a symbol of our sin or less than perfect life. But as a Unity student, we can see the ashes placed on the forehead as a symbol of our obscured spiritual sight. Charles Fillmore, in his teaching of the 12 powers, relates several powers of perception: faith, imagination, understanding, all in this general region. In more ancient times, this was understood as the place of the third eye, or the place of spiritual sight. So in the ceremony of ashes, we can acknowledge that we do not see yet perfectly, again to quote Paul, but we place the ash there as a ceremonial reminder that our life in this physical world can sometimes cloud our vision of what is true, eternal, and lasting. An example from my own life: as I am packing and preparing, I'm still going through things I have in storage that go back to my parents and their parents, lots of family treasures, and just holding these physical items, there can be, for me, a heaviness because there's so much history associated with them. And it becomes difficult to let them go, as if I am losing their meaning. But what I have found helpful and suggest is helpful for a Lenten practice is to take items such as these and know that they serve their purpose, And I can let them go because the meaning they held and what I experienced through them is lasting. The ash indicates that the circumstance or story in our past is over. But the truth is what we learned from that experience, pleasant or unpleasant, is something that is lasting, that we carry in our soul, we do not lose. And at least for me, remembering that what this item represents in my life, its association, for example, with my parents, that I can let it go. Because what it taught me inwardly when my parents were with me is something that is not lost. It's an inner soul capacity that I maintain. And that allows me to let the particular item go. I don't have to live amongst my souvenirs forever, drowning in these outer objects. I can live forever in what I learned from those objects, those experiences, those possessions that taught me in their time. Lent is a long and winding road. It is long because we have to strive or try our best to move from one stage to the next of our spiritual growth. It is winding because we cannot always see the destination. Life brings curves in our path that we cannot see around until we walk and make that turn. These surprises and unexpected events in our Lenten path can be great lessons, but only when we are willing to encounter them with open hearts and minds. Using the tool of Dr. Maria Nemeth that I have often quoted, asking ourselves, as we may encounter this surprise on our path, what am I willing to be in this circumstance that good or God may be realized? What am I willing to be in this circumstance that good or God may be realized? In this circumstance, whether pleasant or unpleasant, what am I willing to be? Compassionate, understanding, creative, bold. What am I willing to be in this circumstance? As we prepare for a Lenten journey, of course, the real spiritual journey of Lent is something within. It is what Charles Fillmore called a mind movement, moving from one idea to another in our consciousness, not an actual road trip. Although if you want to take a road trip during Lent, you can do that too. Taking a physical trip has its own lessons. But basically, the Lenten experience is something that you are going to experience within. But it does have similar qualities to a road trip. If you get ready for a road trip somewhere, you usually think about, what do I need to take? What do I need to pack? What will I need along the way? What will I need at my final destination? And those are important questions to ask for our spiritual journey in Lent. And so I'd like to invite you at this time to join me in an inner reflection and meditation that we each in our own way may ask, what do I need for this journey? And what must I leave behind in order to make the journey. I do not recommend that you start an inspiring road trip and go to your closest U-Haul and get one of their 30-foot trucks to load up with every entire possession that you have, and even borrow some from neighbors just to make sure that you won't find yourself wanting on that road trip. Travel lightly. I grew up traveling a great deal because my parents' greatest love was travel. And I'll always remember my father saying to everyone in the family, "You may take anything you want on the trip as long as you can carry it." And so we learned, and I learned as a child, what I took on the trip, those souvenirs I purchased along the way, whatever you want, but you become responsible, and they are, in a way, a burden. So you choose what you're willing to be your burden or your baggage, so to speak. So I invite you to join me in meditation, closing your eyes. As we prepare to initiate this journey of Lent, this inner movement in our consciousness from our present understanding of good to an even greater consciousness of our good and our path in life. We must travel lightly. Travel with the essentials. What can we, should we leave behind? As the ceremony of ashes taught us, the events, circumstances, objects of our past are in the past. But what we learned in times past were soul qualities, mind qualities that we now carry on our journey. Qualities of patience, strength, wisdom, compassion, creativity, and so much more. Those are the true luggage and supplies we take with us to meet our needs on this spiritual path of discovery. So for a moment, I invite you to consider thoughts, your thoughts. What can you leave behind, and what should you take along? What thoughts have become a heavy burden and should be left behind? What thoughts are uplifting, that always bring you joy, encouragement? You'll want to take these thoughts on your Lenten journey to nourish you. So for a moment in the silence, encounter your inner thoughts. Choose to let go, to fast from, to release, to leave at home. And choose others to be your bread on the journey as you rest in the silence. Now we address our feelings, emotions. I invite you to ask what feelings or emotions have become hard and heavy, fixed. They no longer lift you up, they weigh you down. What feelings are you ready to fast from, to let go, to leave behind? And what feelings inspire, uplift, energize? You'll want these for your journey, for they will be your light to find your way on the Lenten path. Now consider your actions, behaviors, habits, routines. What actions might you leave behind? For they no longer lead you to your highest good, but weigh you down. You are their prisoner. Choose instead the actions, the behaviors, perhaps new ones, that uplift you, encourage you, strengthen you, embolden you. Perhaps it is simply a new routine, a new way of doing things. Lifting you out of any rut and putting you on a new road of discovery. Your Lenten journey. Ever-present Christ, Spirit of truth, we give thanks that as we form these questions for our journey, as we prepare our food, our supplies, even our shelter for the way, that you help us discern that which weighs down and that which lifts up, so that we may travel lightly from what we have known to that which we are coming to know about ourselves and our place and purpose and worthiness in God's good world. And so as we in this time of meditation, we can be assured that each time in the silence during this season of Lent, your Spirit of truth and light and love and wisdom will help us forward with each step we take. Gently we bring our attention back to this outer sanctuary and say, thanks be to God. Thanks be